Here's a pretty rare older style torque converter that I think they only made for a couple years because it turned out to not be such a great idea. This is the spring tab style front cover, noted by the spring tabs welded inside here. What they did is, originally for the E4 they all had single clutch converters. And I don't know this for sure, but according to my colleagues who've been doing this way longer than me, Ford went to a double block converter when the turbo IDI came out. As soon as you add a clutch, you need to put a steel in between them, and you need to hold that steel somehow. And the way they did it is they put in these spring tabs, and they're just spot welded in there in two places, one here and one here. And what happens is, over time, you know, they crack, they break, a spot weld lifts, and then that whole spring tab comes off, starts bouncing around in there, and just blows the whole torque converter to pieces. So here, let's take a look at the clutch assembly. This is the whole clutch assembly with the damper, and some of these springs are broken, but that's really all that was wrong with this. That's why I saved it, because it was in such good shape. So here we see one friction here. So a torque converter clutch pack isn't really explained in the same way that say a forward drum clutch pack is. If you say you've got a 5 friction forward drum, well, you've got 5 friction plates, and each plate has 2 sides. So you have 10 sides, 5 frictions. But we don't say we have 10, we just say we have 5 when we're talking about the forward. Torque converter is different. Torque converter, we say how many sides we have. So this has one side here, and then on the steel that's inside here, in between the damper and the other friction, you can you might be able to see it in there. It's brown. It's on the back side of this steel. So when this goes inside of here, just like that, that's what holds the spring tabs, hold that steel ring, the steel plate inside. So when there's no pressure on it, clutch assembly rotates. When there's pressure on it, it does not. So this dual lock, dual clutch assembly, I don't think it lasted very long with them, but it lasted long enough to wind up into some power strokes. So if they started this with the turbo IDI and they went a couple years, they got it into some 94, maybe 95 power stroke trucks. This came out of, for me, it came out of a 97 truck. The transmission core, it had been rebuilt. The torque converter was OE. It had never been rebuilt. So what I think happened there is what unfortunately a lot of people do is they pay for a rebuilt transmission, then they go try and find a junkyard converter that's good. Well, in this case, this guy lucked out. This was good. It was still working. Everything's in it. That's fine. Two of these springs are broken. The only thing, that issue there is that these spring pieces, they break off, and then they wind up. I actually have his pump right here. You can see this groove here on the side of the stator tube. So one of the spring fragments got jammed between the impeller hub. The impeller hub sits here, got stuck in there, and wore a groove in the side of his stator tube. So that's a much harder Bruce spring steel versus a soft cast steel stator tube. So that's why that gets cut. So in comparison, here's a 4R100 front cover. You can spot a 4R100 OE front cover because it's groped. This is called groping. The sides here, you see all these lines. It's actually, you know, almost, it looks like it was crimped, kind of. And that indicates splines machined on the inside. It does not indicate a triple clutch torque converter. You can have a single, double, or a triple inside one of these covers from the factory. So don't just assume it's a triple clutch converter just because it's got groped sides. That is not true. Trust me. This one happens to be though. And here's the clutch assembly here. Now, again, torque converters go by how many sides of a friction they have. So here's one, here's two, and that goes in, and then here's the third. So these splines mesh with these splines inside of the cover, just like that, and then the rest stacks up on top. And just like that one, this will spin until you put pressure on it, and then it locks. When I picked up this, the two things I noticed with this torque converter, because I hardly ever see these. When I picked this thing up, the first thing I noticed was it has the longer studs on it. Now they use these studs, these longer studs, on the older trucks that had two-piece flex plates. They had a thick cast steel centerpiece, and they use these longer studs to help align the holes so you can get the nuts on them easier. But those were usually 4-stud converters, and this is a 6-stud converter. So this might just be a case where Ford just put a bunch of leftover parts together, welded up 6 of these on here on a spring tab front cover, and maybe they let it go in a Power Stroke truck. But I don't think they let it go in a 97. I think this wouldn't have been around that late. The other thing I noticed, when I pick these things up, I always roll them on their side when I get a core. And if I hear a bunch of stuff, loose stuff shuffling around in there, it's junk. Loose stuff rattling around inside a torque converter is really bad. It'll destroy everything in there. And that usually means it's not a rebuildable torque converter. So whenever I hear them like that, it's just rejected. But what I did hear, when I shook it, I heard that kind of a noise. It sounds different when the whole thing's welded up, but it was a strange sound I never heard before. It didn't sound like anything any loose pieces rattling. So I took it anyway. We cut it open, and this is what it was. It's just the steel ring, a little bit of slop going back and forth. You can actually see it. It's hard to explain, but that was the noise I was hearing. So yeah, it wasn't rebuildable because of the front cover wasn't. We just we did some magic, and we wound up turning it into a billet triple with a new Sonax front cover and some parts, other parts we had laying around.